Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a source that really pushes back on a common story we're often told, the one about what India was really like before the British showed up. Yeah, this question, it's a big one, right? Was British rule a blessing in disguise? You hear this idea a lot, that colonialism, kind of dragged a backward India into the modern world. But is that really the whole story?
So, the source we're looking at today comes from India Facts, and it takes a pretty different approach. It builds its entire argument using accounts from people who were actually there. We're talking foreign travelers, to paint a picture of an India that was, well, way more advanced and wealthy than the popular narrative suggests.
So how do they do this? Well, they take us on a journey back in time. We're going to see ancient and medieval India through the eyes of the people who actually traveled there and wrote down what they saw.
And check this out, we're not just talking about one snapshot in time. We've got a Greek ambassador from 320 BC, a Chinese traveler from the 7th century, and an Austrian missionary from the 18th century. That's a span of almost 2,000 years. It gives us this incredible long-term perspective on the civilization.
All right, let's kick things off way back in 320 BC with our Greek ambassador, Megasthenes. The picture he paints is, well, it's pretty stunning. He talks about a land with tons of food, fertile soil, and clean water. Mines were pulling up gold, silver, copper, you name it. And get this, even during wars, farmers were apparently left alone, totally protected. But the real kicker? He says he saw no slavery. None.
Okay, now let's jump forward nearly a millennium to the 7th century. A Chinese traveler, Huan Song, arrives, and his account suggests things are even more advanced. He's describing these incredibly well-planned cities with towers and roads, multi-story buildings, a massive textile industry making cotton, silk, and hemp. And not just that, a full-on professional army with its own defense industry cranking out weapons and armor. And here's a really interesting point the source makes, especially about hygiene. Huan Song wrote about people taking multiple baths a day, practicing oral hygiene, using clean utensils, all of that. Now the article puts this right next to medieval Europe, where, let's just say, cleanliness wasn't exactly a top priority. It really hammers home how progressive this culture was for its time. So it wasn't just about cities and armies. This level of sophistication, according to the source, absolutely extended to education. The source points back to Huan Song's account, which describes this really structured education system. Apparently, kids would start with a foundational book and then move on to what were called the 5 Vidyas, or sciences. And this wasn't just basic stuff. It covered language, arts, medicine, logic, and even theology. A really comprehensive curriculum.
Now you'd think that after centuries of turmoil, a system like that would just disappear, right? Well, not so fast. The article highlights that when the British conducted surveys in the 19th century, they found this massive homegrown school system was still in place and functioning.
I mean, just look at this number, 12,498. That's how many schools they found in just one region, the Madras Presidency. To put that in perspective, that's about one school for every 1,000 people. For that time period, that's incredible. And it wasn't just in one place. Another survey looked at Bengal and Bihar and estimated that before 1800, something like 100,000 villages had their own school. The point the source is making here is about the sheer scale and accessibility of it all. This was a society that valued education, and it was widespread. Okay, so if you've got this advanced, educated society, the big question is, what happened? How did it change? And that's where the source introduces this narrative of decline.
This is where we come back to that 18th century missionary, Bartolomeo. He wrote about this flourishing place where laws were respected and things were orderly, but said that at present, everything was giving way to absolute authority and despotic sway. And who did he blame? He pointed the finger directly at foreign conquerors who had kicked out the native rulers.
And that observation right there
It sets the stage for what is probably the article's biggest challenge to the history we're often taught about how India fell to foreign invaders.
So, you have two competing stories here. The common one you hear is that India was easy to conquer because of Hindu disunity, and that the lower castes even helped the invaders. But the source we're looking at says, no, that's not what happened. It argues that it took massive invading armies 5 whole centuries to break down a strong, unified resistance from people of all castes.
And they bring receipts, so to speak. To counter that idea of a few thousand guys just walking in and taking over, the source points to historical records. Take Muhammad Ghori's army in 1192. It reportedly had 120,000 horsemen. That is not a small force.
And it gets even bigger. A later ruler, Muhammad Tughlaq, is said to have commanded an army with an astronomical 900,000 horsemen. The whole point the source is making with these numbers is that conquering India was a colossal military undertaking. It wasn't some simple takeover of a society that was already falling apart.
So all of this, the prosperity, the education, the strong resistance, it all builds to the article's final point. What kind of India did the British actually find when they arrived? To answer that, the source leans on this quote from J.T. Sunderland, and it's pretty powerful. The argument is that India was, and I'm quoting here, a far greater industrial and manufacturing nation than any in Europe. Its textiles, its jewelry, its metalwork, they were famous all over the world.
And it wasn't just about making things. The quote goes on to say India was the greatest shipbuilding nation with great commerce and trade that connected it to the whole known world. So the final picture the source leaves us with is of a wealthy, highly developed, and globally connected civilization. That, it says, was the India the British found.
And that really brings us to the final, provocative question the source wants us to think about. If this perspective is true, how does it change the way we see world history? It suggests that maybe our whole understanding of the global balance of power before colonialism needs a second look.